Karen stood there, a twisted smile on her face, a gasoline can in one hand and a lit match in the other. "Your baby's crying is disturbing the neighborhood," she screamed, her voice full of venom. Before I could reach her, the match fell, and suddenly fire broke out. My wife's scream echoed through the street as flames surrounded our house. Karen thought she had finally taught us a lesson, but she didn't know. I'm a county sheriff, and tonight the law wouldn't be written on paper. It would be written in justice. Before the story unfolds, comment below where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable HOA stories. Karen ruled the neighborhood like a tyrant in a pastel cardigan, her power stitched together with gossip and fear. She strutted down the sidewalks every morning at precisely 8 o'clock, clipboard clutched in one hand, phone in the other, snapping pictures of mailboxes and lawns like she was collecting evidence for a case no one else cared about. Her kingdom wasn't large, just a few tidy cul-de-sacs framed by trimmed hedges, but in her mind, it might as well have been an empire. Every flower planted, every porch light left on past 10, every child's bike left in a driveway was a personal offense to her sense of order. The HOA had rules, yes, but Karen's rules went further. She enforced them with the zeal of someone who believed control was the same thing as safety. When Emily and I moved in, we were looking for quiet. I'd spent my life hearing sirens, arguments, the chaos of broken lives echoing through the walls of the sheriff's office. I wanted our newborn Noah to grow up somewhere peaceful, somewhere the loudest sound at night was crickets, not conflict. For the first few days, it felt like we'd found that. The house was small but solid, the yard wide enough for a swing set someday, and the neighbors mostly friendly, waving from porches with polite smiles. But even then, you could feel Karen's presence in the air, like static before a storm. Her first visit came before our boxes were even unpacked. She appeared at our door wearing a floral blouse and an expression that suggested she was smelling something sour. "Welcome to Oakwood Estates," she said, though her tone made it clear the welcome was conditional. She pointed to the color of our shutters. "You'll need to submit a form for that shade of blue. It's not on the approved palette." Then her eyes drifted to the car seat by the door where Noah slept, only 3 days old. A tiny bundle wrapped in hospital cotton. "And you'll need to make sure the baby noise stays under control. This is a peaceful community." I remember the way my wife looked at me, a flicker of disbelief crossing her face. "He's a newborn," Emily said, voice gentle but incredulous. "He cries." Karen's smile didn't waver. "We all make sacrifices for harmony," she said, turning sharply on her heel. The echo of her shoes on the walkway felt like a gavel striking. That night, Noah cried, as newborns do, and at 2 a.m. came the pounding. The sound was frantic, metallic, angry. I opened the door still half in uniform, badge catching the porch light. Karen stood there, hair wrapped in curlers, robe tied tight, eyes burning. "This has to stop," she hissed. "People pay good money for peace here. We won't tolerate noise violations." "Ma'am," I said, keeping my tone even, the way I did with suspects about to cross a line. "My son is 3 days old. He's not violating anything." She looked at the badge, then at me, and something twisted in her expression. A smirk that said she wasn't intimidated. "You might be the law out there," she said, "but in this neighborhood, I make the rules." The door closed between us with a soft click, but the echo of her words lingered. Out there and in here, she'd drawn a boundary, and I could feel the challenge in it. Over the next week, the notices started appearing in our mailbox. Lawn height exceeds regulation. Trash bins visible from curb, violation 3.2. Noise complaint filed, infant disturbance. Each one printed on official letterhead. Each one signed with that looping, triumphant signature, Karen Delaney. "Cho President," I tried to ignore her. I told myself she was lonely, power-hungry, maybe even well-intentioned in her own warped way. But every day she found a new angle. A curtain left open too late. A stroller parked on the porch instead of inside. Once she actually measured the spacing between our fence posts with a tape measure, muttering about non-compliance. Emily tried to stay positive. She baked cookies, left them on Karen's doorstep with a note that said, "We hope we can be friends." The plate returned the next morning, cookies untouched. Note crumpled and stuffed into the mailbox. Sleep was already scarce with a newborn. But now it came in fragments, always broken by the sense that we were being watched. I caught Karen outside more than once, camera in hand, pretending to photograph landscaping issues, but angling her lens straight at our windows. One evening, as I carried Noah from the car after a long shift, Karen appeared again, stepping out of the shadows of her porch. "You know," she said, voice low and brittle, "babies who cry all night aren't fit for communities like this. Maybe you should look for somewhere louder." That was the first time the anger actually surfaced. Not the professional kind, the slow burn that builds after years of seeing the worst in people, but a deeper, more personal heat. I took a step closer, careful, deliberate. "If you ever threaten my family again," I said quietly, "you'll find out exactly how the law works." For the first time, she hesitated. Her lips parted like she might apologize, but pride sealed them shut. She turned away without another word, but her silence was worse than shouting. It meant she was thinking. After that, the neighborhood's mood shifted. People started avoiding eye contact. Some nodded at me in quiet solidarity. Others looked away, afraid of drawing Karen's attention. It was strange, how one person's obsession with control could infect everyone else with fear. Even the wind seemed to move differently, heavy with tension. Late one night, I stood by Noah's crib, listening to him breathe, watching the moonlight spill across the floor. For a moment, everything was calm. Emily slept on the couch, exhaustion etched across her face. And then, faintly, through the open window, I heard it, the crunch of gravel, slow footsteps outside. I looked out just in time to see the flash of a phone camera aimed at our porch light. Karen. Again. I felt something shift inside me then, something final. This wasn't just an overzealous neighbor or a bored retiree enforcing HOA bylaws. This was someone crossing a line I could never allow. I stepped outside, but by the time I reached the sidewalk, she was already retreating into the darkness, her laugh, soft, smug, victorious, carried on the night air. I knew it then. Peace was over. And Karen had no idea that the man she was provoking wasn't just another neighbor with a baby. He was a sheriff, a man who'd spent his life bringing order to chaos. And if she wanted a war of rules, I was ready to show her what real justice looked like. Karen's campaign against us grew like mold in the dark, quiet at first, then everywhere all at once. Every morning, the hum of normal suburban life was interrupted by her sharp voice echoing through the street. She'd linger on the sidewalk in front of our home, phone angled toward the house, snapping photos with the obsessive precision of a crime scene investigator. To her, every detail was proof of our supposed violations. The stroller left by the porch, the baby monitor wire visible in the window, even the soft lullaby lights we'd hung to help Noah sleep. All of it, she said, broke the aesthetic harmony of Oakwood Estates. Emily tried to reason with her at first. She approached with that patient tone only new mothers seemed to master, explaining that we were exhausted, that Noah's crying wasn't defiance. It was survival. Karen listened with her arms folded, and that fake sympathetic smile plastered across her face, the kind people use when they're already planning their next attack. The moment Emily turned her back, Karen was on her phone, documenting everything, her thumb moving fast as she filed another complaint to the HOA board that she basically controlled. I tried to stay composed. The badge on my chest meant something. It meant restraint, professionalism, trust. But it was hard to keep that mindset when I saw the stress etching itself into Emily's face, when I'd come home from a 14-hour shift to find her in tears because another notice had been taped to the door. Karen's words were venom disguised as bureaucracy, noise violation, unapproved modifications, unsightly property conditions. Each letter came printed on official HOA paper, her name typed neatly at the bottom like a signature of authority. At first, it was easy to dismiss as harassment. Then the letters started showing up without signatures. Plain white envelopes, no return address, slid under our door in the night. The words inside were short, cruel, and cold. Your child is disturbing the peace. Move or suffer the consequences. I read them under the kitchen light, the kind of rage rising that starts in your gut and burns behind your eyes. I'd faced threats before, from dealers, fugitives, men with guns and grudges, but this was different. This was someone weaponizing proximity, using neighborly pretense to cloak malice. Emily saw the look on my face and whispered, "She won't stop, will she?" I didn't answer because I already knew the truth. People like Karen don't stop. They escalate. I installed cameras, front, back, side angles covering every inch of our property, motion sensors by the gate, a second lock on the nursery window. Emily thought I was being paranoid, but I'd seen too many people realize too late that paranoia was just preparation misunderstood. Karen didn't like being watched. I could tell by the way she'd glare at the small red light of the camera as she walked past. Sometimes she'd wave, slow and mocking, like we were co-stars in some twisted drama only she understood. Other times she'd whisper loud enough for the microphone to catch it, things like "should have stayed childless," or "noise like that drives people crazy." The rest of the neighborhood pretended not to see what was happening. That's how fear works, it silences good people. I'd catch curtains twitching when Karen came by, neighbors peeking out, then vanishing before I could meet their eyes. Some of them had already been targets of her rules: grass half an inch too tall, a mailbox painted the wrong shade, a wind chime deemed too reflective. They'd learned compliance was easier than confrontation. One afternoon, I came home to find the police parked outside my house. For a split second, my heart stopped. I rushed up the driveway only to see Karen standing there, hands on her hips, talking to one of the young officers I trained myself. She was crying, fake tears glistening under the sun, as she pointed toward our home. "She's claiming you threatened her," the officer said awkwardly. Karen sniffled dramatically. "He said he'd make me regret living here. He's unstable. You should check his guns." I took a slow breath. Did she mention she's been stalking my family for weeks? The officer's gaze flicked between us, uncertain. He'd seen my file, my record, the commendations. But the law doesn't shield you from lies. It just makes them sting more when they come from someone you can't legally ignore. After a few tense minutes, he left, apologetic but bound by procedure. Karen smiled at me over his shoulder, triumphant. She'd found a new weapon, the system I swore to uphold. That night, Emily cried while feeding Noah. She asked if we should move, if it was worth staying where every creak of the floor made her jump. I held her and said no, because running would mean Karen won. And people like her only understand one thing: consequences. The next morning, I woke to find our mailbox bent sideways, tire tracks gouged into the grass. Another letter was taped to the front door, this one scrawled by hand: "Babies that loud don't belong here." Something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger, it was calculation. Every insult, every threat, every act of pettiness had built a profile in my mind, the same way I'd build a suspect file. Karen wasn't acting on impulse anymore. She was testing limits, seeing how far she could push before someone pushed back. I started documenting everything: dates, times, photos, witness statements from the few neighbors brave enough to talk. It wasn't revenge. It was evidence. The kind that turns whispers into convictions. Still, even with preparation, I could feel something coming. The air felt charged, like the seconds before a storm when everything goes still. Karen had crossed from harassment into obsession, and people obsessed with control don't stop until they destroy what threatens their illusion of power. Every night before bed, I checked the locks twice. I walked through Noah's room, watched him sleeping, tiny chest rising and falling under the glow of the baby monitor. I promised him silently that no one, not even a self-appointed queen with a clipboard, would ever hurt him, but promises are fragile things. And when the quiet of the neighborhood finally shattered, when the smoke and the sirens came, I realized that even the strongest walls can't always keep out madness wearing the smile of a neighbor. The night it happened didn't begin with fire. It began with silence, the kind of thick, uneasy quiet that settles when the air itself seems to be waiting for something. Noah had finally fallen asleep after a long evening of crying, his little breath soft and steady through the monitor. Emily was curled on the couch, too tired to make it to bed, the TV playing low just for background noise. I sat at the kitchen table, uniform shirt still half on, finishing a report I'd brought home from the department. It should have been an ordinary night, but ever since Karen's last warning, there hadn't been such a thing as ordinary. I'd learned to read tension like weather, and that night, the neighborhood felt storm-heavy. Every sound outside carried a pulse: crickets, wind, the hum of a streetlight, all sharper somehow. Around midnight, the baby monitor flickered, a faint static tremor passing through the speaker. Then the motion alert pinged on my phone. The front porch camera had picked something up. I glanced at the screen and froze. A figure moved in the darkness just beyond the porch steps, crouched low, something metallic glinting in her hand. I didn't need to see her face to know who it was. The outline of that stiff, squared posture was burned into my memory. Karen. The woman who complained about every creak, who measured our fence slats, who wrote letters telling us our baby was destroying peace. Now she was outside my home in the dead of night, creeping toward the house where my family slept. I stood, every instinct snapping into focus. Sheriff training, father's instinct, survival, it all collided into one clear impulse: protect them. But before I reached the door, the faint sound came, metal twisting, liquid sloshing, the unmistakable smell of gasoline seeping through the air. I lunged for the handle, but the second I pulled it open, a flare of light cut through the dark. A single flicker, small and quick, then the world turned orange. Fire bloomed up the porch railing like it had been waiting for permission. The heat was instant, shocking, alive. The boards cracked, the windows flared, the sound of it was violent, like roaring wind mixed with the scream of wood breaking apart. I shouted for Emily, and somewhere behind me, Noah began to cry, a sound too human, too fragile against the fury building outside. Through the blaze, I saw her, Karen, standing just beyond the gate, her face glowing with reflected flame. Her mouth was twisted into something halfway between satisfaction and madness. She shouted something, words that barely made sense through the noise, but the tone was clear. Triumph. She thought this was justice, her version of order, purging the noise from her perfect world. I grabbed the extinguisher, hit the porch, and the heat slammed into me like a wall. Every breath was smoke and fire. My hands moved without thought, spraying, fighting, kicking through the collapsing boards. Inside, Emily screamed my name, and that sound cut deeper than the fire ever could. I reached her through the chaos. Noah clutched to her chest, his cries raw and desperate. The room was already filling with smoke, the nursery curtains glowing at the edges. I threw a wet towel over them, yanked open the back door, and pushed them out first. The moment the cold night air hit us, the house exhaled smoke like a wounded beast. Neighbors began to appear, their faces pale, lit by orange light. Some had phones in their hands, recording instead of helping. Others stood frozen, disbelief rooting them in place. Karen was gone. I didn't need to chase her. I already had what I needed. The camera had caught everything. Every movement, every spark. Her fingerprints were all over the match that started it. When the firefighters arrived, they found us in the yard, Emily sobbing, Noah wailing but alive, and me still holding the half-melted extinguisher. My uniform was streaked with ash, my arms burned, but none of that mattered. My family was breathing. That was all that counted. One of the firefighters clapped me on the shoulder, saying we were lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt hollow, empty, except for a slow, controlled rage that filled every space inside me like the smoke that had filled our home. They asked who did it. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the house, at the blackened wood, the warped porch railing, the baby's blanket still smoldering where it had fallen. Then I said her name. Karen Delaney, HOA president, the woman who thought she ran this street. The woman who believed her rules meant more than human life. The arson investigator took my statement, polite but cautious, probably wondering if trauma was clouding my judgment. But I wasn't guessing. I had the footage, the smell of gas still in the air, and the image of that smile burned into my mind like the fire itself. Emily sat wrapped in a blanket, rocking Noah, whispering over and over that we were okay. I knelt beside her and promised her she'd never have to see that woman again. But even as I said it, I knew this wasn't finished. Karen didn't act on impulse. She planned. And people who plan this kind of chaos don't just vanish. They watch to see the aftermath, to feel the power of it. Somewhere she was out there, maybe even watching the sirens flash from behind her curtains, convinced she'd won. I stood there under the red and blue lights, the neighborhood quiet except for the hiss of dying flames, and I made a silent vow. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. I'd seen monsters in uniforms, in suits, in alleys. I'd never thought I'd meet one hiding behind a white picket fence and a homeowner's charter. But that's what Karen was now, a criminal hiding behind civility. The house could be rebuilt. The porch could be replaced. But the line she crossed? That couldn't be undone. I looked at the ashes of our home and felt something settle inside me. Not grief, not anger, but purpose. Karen thought she could control everything. She had no idea what it meant to provoke a man who lived by the law and understood how to wield it. By morning, she'd see her name on a warrant. And when I knocked on her door next, it wouldn't be as her neighbor. It would be as the sheriff who'd watched her set fire to his family and was finally ready to return the favor with justice. By dawn, the neighborhood still smelled like smoke. The air hung heavy, thick with that sour mix of ash and melted plastic. Our home stood black and broken, the kind of wreck that made silence louder than sirens ever could. Emily and Noah were safe at the hospital, and the moment the doctor said they'd be fine, something inside me locked into place. Grief turned to focus. Emotion into mission. I wasn't just a father who'd lost his home. I was a sheriff who'd just watched a crime unfold in his own front yard. Karen thought she could burn her problems away and hide behind her rules, but rules don't protect criminals. I'd seen her face through the camera footage, the outline of her car idling just long enough to make sure the flames caught. That image replayed behind my eyes like a loop I couldn't pause. She wasn't panicked when she left. She was proud. She believed she'd taken control back. That told me everything I needed to know about where she'd go next. People like her always retreat to the place that feeds their ego, their throne. For Karen, that throne was the HOA office. I called dispatch. My voice was calm, steady, procedural. Bolo out on Karen Delaney. Female, late 50s, 5'4", white cardigan. Last seen leaving the scene of an active arson on Oakwood Drive. Suspect is armed with accelerants. Unstable and potentially dangerous. There was a pause on the line. The kind of silence that says, "Did I hear that right?" Then a clipped, "Copy, Sheriff." The words felt good. Order reclaiming ground chaos had stolen. When I pulled up to the HOA building, her car was already there. The pale blue SUV sat crooked across 2 parking spaces, engine still ticking, the license plate streaked with soot. The lights inside the small office glowed harsh against the early morning haze. Through the glass, I could see her pacing. Her movements were sharp, erratic, hands flying as she muttered to herself. Even from a distance, I could tell she wasn't holding a phone. She was clutching that clipboard, the symbol of her authority, the one she'd used to terrorize every neighbor on that street. She didn't notice me when I stepped through the door. Her eyes were fixed on the wall, where a bulletin board overflowed with printed violations and typed notices, her handwriting looping in red ink over the names of people she'd shamed into submission. It looked less like community management and more like obsession. There were pictures too, houses, cars, lawns, and right in the center a photo of mine. The word noise scrawled across it in black marker. "You've gone too far, Karen." My voice came out low but sharp, carrying enough authority to slice through her rambling. She turned. For a heartbeat, she looked almost human, shocked, confused, like she hadn't expected me to be standing there alive. Then her face hardened into that familiar mask, the one she wore when she handed out citations or threatened fines. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her tone brittle but defiant. "This is private HOA property." "You're trespassing," I stepped closer. The smell of gasoline still clung to my jacket, and I saw her nostrils flare as she caught it. "You set my house on fire," I said. "You tried to kill my family." She shook her head violently, backing toward her desk. "That's ridiculous." "I was at home." "You have no proof." "I have your face on camera," I said. Every second of it. For the first time, her expression faltered. Not guilt, fear. The kind that comes when power finally starts to slip through your fingers. "You can't prove intent," she snapped, but the quiver in her voice betrayed her. "You poured gasoline around a baby's window," I said. "That's not a mistake, Karen, that's intent." She reached for something on her desk, maybe a phone, maybe just another prop to hide behind, but I moved faster. I circled the desk, blocking her in, the distance between us shrinking until she could see the reflection of her own flames in my eyes. "You think you can arrest me?" She spat, desperation cracking through her words. "I own this neighborhood. Everyone here answers to me." I leaned in just enough for her to see that the man she was talking to wasn't a frightened neighbor anymore. "Not anymore," I said. "You don't own anything. You destroyed a family's home. You tried to burn a baby alive. You're done." Her composure broke. The clipboard hit the floor. She made a sudden move toward the door, but instinct took over. Training is muscle memory, and mine never fails. In a single motion, I caught her wrist, turned her momentum against her, and guided her down. The sound of the cuffs clicking shut was final. sharp, metallic punctuation on months of torment. She screamed as I read her rights, her voice cracking, high-pitched, furious. "You can't do this! I'll have you fired. You're violating HOA protocol. You're all against me." Her words tumbled out fast, blending into the kind of incoherence that only comes when someone realizes the illusion of control is gone for good. By the time the first patrol car arrived, she was still ranting, spitting out threats and conspiracies, insisting the fire was my fault somehow, that she'd been provoked, that we'd broken the peace contract of Oakwood Estates. The officers looked at her, then at me, and no one said it out loud, but we all understood. This wasn't just an arrest. It was the end of something rotten that had been festering under the surface for years. As they guided her to the car, neighbors began to appear, drawn by the lights and the commotion. Some wore robes, others work clothes, faces pale with disbelief. For the first time, they weren't afraid of her. They were seeing her for what she really was. Karen shouted at them, calling them ungrateful, accusing them of betrayal, her voice echoing through the cul-de-sac like a final desperate performance. When the car door slammed shut, the sound was almost cleansing. I stood there, breathing in the smoky dawn air, watching the vehicle pull away. The street felt different already, lighter somehow, as if the whole neighborhood had been holding its breath for months and could finally exhale. Justice doesn't always roar in with sirens. Sometimes it walks in quietly, steady and sure, wearing a badge and a burn-scarred jacket. Karen thought she could control everything. But control is just another kind of cage, and she'd built hers so perfectly that she didn't see the bars closing in until it was too late. As the last of the lights faded, I looked back toward the smoldering outline of our house, then up at the dawn breaking over the roofs. This wasn't a victory. It was survival. But survival, when earned, feels a lot like freedom. The sun was higher now, washing the street in a pale, almost golden calm that felt unreal after so much chaos. Karen sat handcuffed in the back of the squad car, her face pressed to the glass, still shouting at anyone who would listen. Her voice cracked, shrill and furious, but no one flinched anymore. The spell she'd held over the neighborhood was gone. For the first time, people weren't hiding behind curtains or whispering in driveways. They were standing tall, watching her leave. Neighbors gathered near the sidewalk, faces pale but alert, some holding coffee cups, others holding phones, recording, documenting the moment they never thought they'd see. The same woman who'd fined them for having the wrong mailbox color, who had screamed at kids for riding bikes on her street, who had threatened to call code enforcement for wind chimes, was now in custody for something far darker than petty power games. She banged on the window again, her voice muffled but venomous. "You all need me. You think you can manage this neighborhood without order? Without me, everything will fall apart." No one answered. Her words drifted into the crisp air and vanished like smoke from the fire she had lit. I stood near the car, watching her with that same steady composure I'd practiced my entire career. A sheriff's job doesn't end when the cuffs go on. It ends when justice holds. My badge felt heavier than usual, maybe because this wasn't just another arrest. It was personal. It was about my wife, my newborn, my home, and every neighbor she had terrorized under the disguise of authority. One man stepped forward, Mr. Wilkes, the quiet retiree whose lawn Karen had once measured with a ruler. His hands trembled slightly as he looked from me to the car. "Sheriff," he said, voice shaking, "if you need statements, I have plenty." She threatened me more than once. Said she'd have my house condemned if I didn't trim my hedges to regulation height. Another neighbor joined him, a young couple from down the street. "She called CPS on us because our toddler's toys were visible in the yard," the wife said, her voice rising with long-suppressed anger. "Said we were lowering the standards of appearance for the subdivision." Then came more. Each voice added to the growing wave, stories of harassment, false reports, fines that had no legal basis, intimidation tactics that had left good people afraid to step outside. For every accusation Karen had thrown, there was someone ready now to speak. I nodded, pulling out my notebook. "We'll take every statement," I said. "She'll be charged not just for the fire, but for every act of criminal intimidation, harassment, and fraud she's committed under the HOA name." "This ends today," Karen heard me. She twisted against her restraints, eyes wild, shouting through the small crack in the car window. "You can't do that. You're just a small-town cop. I'll have your badge." "My brother's a lawyer." Her voice trembled on that last word, lawyer, as if it could save her. But the crowd wasn't buying it anymore. The same neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid her now stood in a semicircle, unflinching. Some were angry, some just tired, but all of them shared that same look of quiet defiance. The fear she'd cultivated for years had evaporated, burned away by truth. Dispatch confirmed over the radio. A warrant would follow, evidence secured, statements collected. Karen Delaney, self-appointed queen of Oakwood Estates, was officially being booked for arson, reckless endangerment, and attempted murder. The officer at the wheel started the engine. Karen's voice pitched higher, desperate now. "You'll regret this! All of you! You'll see what happens when you go against me." The car pulled away slowly, her shouts fading into the distance until there was nothing but the hum of engines and the whisper of wind through the trees. And then silence. It wasn't an empty silence. It was peace. The kind of silence you earn. Neighbors turned toward me, their faces softened, their shoulders dropping the tension they'd carried for years. Mrs. Ellison, who lived across the street, wiped tears from her eyes. "She's gone," she whispered, almost in disbelief. "She's really gone," I nodded. "She's gone. But if any of you were hurt, threatened, or forced into something because of her, now's the time to speak. Justice doesn't stop with her arrest, it starts with your voices." That struck something in them. One by one, people began to share, each confession loosening the grip Karen had left behind. It was as if the neighborhood itself was exhaling, cleansing, resetting. Someone asked quietly, "Sheriff, will she ever come back?" I met their eyes, every ounce of conviction in my voice. Not on my watch. And that was it. The final reassurance they needed. People lingered, talking in small groups. Some offered to help rebuild the ramp and repair what the fire had destroyed. Others brought food, supplies, even a few toys for Noah when he came home. The same street that had once lived under Karen's rule of fear now felt like a community again. As I stood there, listening to the murmurs of neighbors helping neighbors, something shifted inside me. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration, about making sure good people could live without fear. Karen had used rules to control others, but law, real law, existed to protect them. And now, that protection was back where it belonged. Hours later, when the last of the reports were taken and the last cruiser left, I stood in front of the smoldering shell of our porch. The ashes smelled like endings and beginnings all at once. Emily would bring Noah home soon, and when they did, I wanted them to see not the destruction, but the strength that had risen from it. The neighborhood lights flickered on, one by one like a quiet chain reaction of hope. Windows opened. Doors creaked. For the first time in years, laughter drifted down Oakwood Drive. Karen's voice was gone. Her clipboard, her rules, her arrogance, all gone. And in that silence, the neighborhood began to heal. Weeks passed, and the neighborhood finally began to breathe again. The blackened wood had been replaced with something stronger, steel-reinforced, flame-resistant, unyielding. The new ramp shimmered under the morning sun, a symbol of everything Karen had failed to destroy. The flowers Emily planted beside it bloomed in bright, defiant colors, as if even the earth itself wanted to prove that beauty could rise from ashes. The scent of fresh paint lingered in the air, mixing with the faint sweetness of cut grass. Neighbors stopped by now, not to complain, not to whisper, but to talk, to offer help, to laugh, to share coffee and stories. The street that had once lived under Karen's constant tension now pulsed with real life. It felt like a place where children could ride bikes again, where people waved instead of hiding. Oakwood Drive was healing, one sunrise at a time. Karen's name was still whispered sometimes, but no longer with fear. It was a cautionary echo, a story parents told their kids about what happens when power becomes poison. The HOA board had been restructured. The community had voted for change. Real rules now, fair ones, transparent ones. No more threats disguised as policy. No more harassment wrapped in a smile. The day I got the official notice of Karen's sentencing, the sky was clear and endless. The judge hadn't held back. 5 years, minimum. Multiple counts, arson, attempted murder, abuse of authority. Her defense tried to spin it as stress, as mental decline, but the evidence was too strong, her intent too cruel. The footage from that night had said everything words couldn't. The jury didn't even deliberate long. When I told Emily, she just nodded quietly. "It won't bring back what we lost," she said, "but at least it means she can't hurt anyone else." I looked at her, at Noah cradled against her chest, his tiny breath steady and soft. She didn't just burn wood, I said. She tried to burn peace, but she failed, and that was the truth. The fire hadn't taken anything essential. It had revealed what was indestructible. Every evening I sat on that rebuilt porch, Noah resting in my arms. The air always carried a hint of the old smoke, faint but permanent, like a scar you stop hiding after it's healed. Emily would join me, leaning her head against my shoulder. The sunsets were different now. Not peaceful in the naive way they once were, but deeper, earned. The neighbors often waved from their lawns. Some stopped to talk. Mr. Wilkes had started mowing extra lawns just because he wanted to help. The young couple down the street organized a block party, something no one had dared to attempt when Karen was around. Laughter echoed where accusations once ruled. And every time I saw someone smile without fear, I felt a quiet kind of justice settle in. Sometimes, people asked if I regretted taking the job, wearing the badge, being the man who always had to stand between chaos and order. But when I looked at my wife, at my son, at the home that had risen stronger from the ashes, the answer came easily. Not for a second, I always said. Because the badge doesn't just mean enforcing laws, it means protecting what can't be replaced. One evening, as the sun bled gold over the horizon, Emily turned to me. Do you think she ever thinks about what she did? I held Noah closer, feeling the slow rhythm of his heartbeat. Maybe, I said. But whether she does or not doesn't matter. What matters is that we remember who we are, not what she tried to make us. Emily smiled. That soft kind of smile that means peace after a storm. You really never stop being a sheriff, do you? Not when there's something worth protecting. We sat in silence after that, listening to the wind hum through the trees, carrying the quiet sounds of life, the laughter of children, the bark of a dog, the clink of a neighbor's wind chime. Once, that same wind had carried the crackle of flames and the screams of a madwoman convinced she ruled the world. Now it carried something cleaner. Renewal. I looked out over the street, the ramp, the home that had been rebuilt by more than my hands. It had been rebuilt by courage, by faith, by community. Karen thought she could use fire to teach a lesson. She was right in a way. She taught everyone something she never intended. She taught them what happens when fear meets resolve, when cruelty meets conviction, when hatred meets love that refuses to burn. The night air cooled as the sun slipped behind the rooftops. The streetlights flickered on one by one, steady and familiar. Emily went inside to put Noah to bed, but I stayed a little longer. I traced the smooth metal railing of the ramp, feeling the faint warmth it still held from the setting sun. A promise made solid. Some scars stay with you. They remind you of what was lost, but they also remind you of what survived. That's what the faint smell of smoke meant now. Not fear, not anger, just memory. Proof that we'd been tested and endured. When I finally stood, I looked back at our home, at the light spilling from the windows. It didn't look like a place that had burned. It looked like a place reborn. And I realized that Karen's fire hadn't destroyed anything. It had tempered us, made us unbreakable. She thought she could erase peace. Instead, she made it stronger. She thought she could shatter a family. Instead, she forged one that would never fracture. So I whispered the words that had carried me through every fight, every loss, every mission. No one hurts my family and walks away. Then I went inside, closing the door on the past for good. The neighborhood slept easy that night. The sheriff's badge hung by the door, gleaming faintly in the porch light, a silent promise to anyone who might ever forget. Justice doesn't die in fire. It's forged in it, and somewhere beyond the city walls in a cold concrete cell, Karen Delaney finally sat in silence too, face pale, eyes blank, surrounded by the one rule she could never rewrite, consequences. The flames she lit had burned her world away. Ours, though. Ours had only just begun to shine.